cutting down our animal protein intake would significantly help with the issue of climate change and reducing greenhouse gases. Our planet is warming more quickly than ever, and by 2040, the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, estimates that the world will be in complete crisis. With extreme weather and its impacts devastating wildlife, homes, and farms across the country, we are all itching to do our part. One way we can significantly help reduce greenhouse gases and help delay further climate change is for all of us to eat less meat. After researching countless articles on the importance of cutting down animal protein intake, I'm prepared to inform you guys about this topic. So in my speech, I'm going to inform my audience of the causes and problems of climate change and what solutions we can personally do to help this situation. To be able to understand how we can help, we first need to be familiarized with greenhouse gases and how meat and animal products contribute to climate change. Alright, so climate change refers to long-term shifts in temperatures and weather patterns. So some of these shifts may be natural, such as variations through the solar cycle, but since the 1800s, human activities have been the main driver in climate change, primarily due to burning fossil fuels like coal and gas, as well as oil. Burning fossil fuels generates greenhouse gas emissions that act like a blanket wrapped around the earth, trapping in the sun's heat and raising temperatures. Examples of greenhouse gas emissions that are caused by climate change include carbon dioxide and methane. These come from using gasoline for driving a car or coal for heating a building, for example. Clearing land from forests can also help release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So energy, industry, transport, buildings, agriculture, and land are among these main emitters. Greenhouse gas concentrations are at the highest levels that it's been in 2 million years. According to the UN, our emissions continue to rise. As a result, Earth is now about 1.1 degrees Celsius warmer than it was in the late 1800s. So in the last decade, about 2011 to 2020 was the warmest on record. So many people think climate change mainly means warmer temperatures, but temperature rise is only the beginning of the story. Because Earth is a system and everything is connected, changes in one area can influence all others. The consequences of climate change now include intense droughts, water scarcity, severe fires, rising sea levels, floods, melting polar ice caps, and catastrophic storms, as well as declining biodiversity. Many climate change solutions can deliver economic benefits while improving our lives and protecting the environment. These broad categories of action are cutting down emissions, adapting to climate impacts, and financing required adjustments. Switching energy systems from fossil fuels to renewables like solar or wind power will reduce emissions, driving climate change. But we have to start this right now. Climate action requires significant investments from governments and businesses, as well as switching energy systems from fossil fuels to renewables. For example, solar or wind may reduce the emissions driving climate change. Now that I've explained the basics on greenhouse gases and their effects on climate change, I'm going to explain one major leading factor in this issue, which is food production and agriculture. A lot of solutions to climate change are out of our personal control, like building renewable energy sources and government funding, but there is one particular way that we can significantly help. So food production accounts for 1/4 of the world's greenhouse gas emissions and takes up half of the planet's habitable surface. So take a moment to think how much meat you consume weekly. Meat has a large impact on greenhouse gases and our climate. The massive animals raised for slaughter on Earth now outweighs wildlife from a factor 15 to 1. For example, for every person on the planet, there are approximately 3 chickens. Meat and dairy specifically account for 14.5% of global greenhouse emissions, according to the UN's Food and Agricultural Organization. If the world is to meet its target of limiting global warming, some degree of diet shift will be necessary, scientists say. If we are going to strive for a more optimistic target of keeping warming stagnant, we need to make these giant changes, and it needs to be now. So how do emissions from meat, dairy, and other foods compare? Animal-based foods have the largest carbon footprint. This is partly down to the biology of how these animals digest food, and Professor Sir Charles Godfrey, a population biologist at the head of Oxford Martin School at the University of Oxford, explains that animal products from ruminant animals, which are sheep, cows, and their relatives, all animals with 4 stomachs, tend to have greater greenhouse gas effects. Part of this is because the digestion of these animals produce a lot of methane. Grazing cattle and other animals also need plentiful supplies of grass, meaning farmers often have to use nitrogen fertilizer on their field to stimulate plant growth. The production of nitrogen fertilizer causes the release of CO2 and the potent greenhouse gas nitrous oxide. So now you know the cost of eating animal-based foods on the environment. I bet you're wondering, what can I do to help this situation? And the answer is simple. In comparison to meat and dairy, plant-based foods have a much smaller carbon footprint. On average, emissions from plant-based foods are 10 to 50 times smaller than from animal products, according to the science study. But how much more plant-based diets really help? According to an analysis done by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, a global shift to a flexitarian diet, where 3/4 of meat and dairy replaced by a plant-based alternatives, could save over 5 billion tons of carbon dioxide a year by 2050, which is insane. Also, this analysis states that a global shift to just eating a healthy diet could offset around 4.5 billion tons of carbon dioxide by the year 2050. This evidence shows just how much people can help reduce climate change and greenhouse gas emissions by just doing a simple part of eating less animal-based products and incorporating more vegetarian habits into our diets. Through this presentation, you have learned about greenhouse gas emissions, in particular, emissions created by animal-based products, and the significant effect it has on the planet. Cutting down our animal protein intake is one of the greatest, simplest, and most immediate ways that we can help reduce greenhouse gases and save the planet we all call home. So next time you go to the grocery shopping, genuinely think about the products you're buying and ask yourself if it's worth harming the planet over.